Hey YouTube, welcome to Rampage Reviews. I'm Rampage, and this time we're reviewing a book that takes place right before the Darth Bane trilogy. Let's dive in. So the book that we're reviewing today is called Star Wars Knight Errant, and it's by John Jackson Miller. The book takes place about 1,000 years BBY. And the book does take place right before the Darth Bane trilogy, but it doesn't connect to the Darth Bane trilogy at all, at least from what I can see. The way the story starts out is you meet a Bothan named Narsk, and if you're familiar with the Bothan species, then you'll remember that famous line from episode 6, "Many Bothans died to bring us this information," which was delivered by Mon Mothma in episode 6. So Narsk is actually in a hangar called the Black Fang that exists in the Daemonate. And the Daemonate is a system that's ruled by Daemon, a Sith Lord in Sith Space. Most of the book will take place in different systems that exist within Sith Space because there's a whole chart of space that's owned by several Sith Lords that we find out later are related to each other, and it's separate from the Republic-owned space. So think of it as like the Republic versus the Empire. The Empire would be the Sith Lords that rule in Sith Space, although they don't rule together. They're constantly fighting with each other, actually. We find out why later. So Narsk is in Black Fang, the hangar in the Daemonate, and he's searching for an energy shield package, which is something that's supposed to help Odian's military. He's wearing a stealth suit that they refer to as the Mark 6. While he's searching around this hangar, he actually runs into Kerra Holt, which is the other main character of this book. Kerra Holt is a Jedi Knight from the Republic, and she spends a lot of time in Sith Space because she's there to try to help people who are oppressed and try to help them escape to get back to the Republic. That's one thing that she does over and over again throughout her career. It's something that she grew up doing, or at least that her master grew up doing, Vanner Treese. She spent time in Sith Space with him there. He performed the same kinds of missions. So then she took up the mantle, and she's been doing the same thing. So Kerra Holt sneaks up behind Narsk while he's trying to look around the Black Fang for this energy shield package. She actually captures him, bounds him, and interrogates him on why he's there. She assumes that he works for the Sith Lords, or maybe he might be part of the Sith. He does reveal that he works for Odian, but he's there to try to help kill Daemon. Although she doesn't really care for that answer because the fact that he still works for another Sith Lord means that he's an enabler. He's just a neutral party working for him as a mercenary. She gets this information out of him. She actually tells him he needs to strip off his stealth suit because she wants to steal it from him. Then she binds him up and leaves him to be captured by the Correctors, which are other low-level Force users that Daemon uses to help keep people in line. Kerra then retreats back to her home on Dark Nell, which is the planet that she's actually on, that Daemon rules over. She is friends with a person named, I think it's Gub Tango. I can't remember exactly the name. You don't really hear about him a whole lot in the book, but he does have a granddaughter named Tan Tango, who works for Industrial Heuristics. It's like a military research facility, and they take in recruits to bolster their military up. I think they end up being like soldiers or something like that. She's plays a small part in this book, Tan Tango does, and the part that she plays is later on, she's going to actually be kind of in the middle of a target that takes place between a couple of Sith Lords. Moving ahead myself, but in another part of the story, then we are introduced to Jaro Rusher, who's like a military mercenary that Daemon actually recruits to help bolster his military because he is planning a strike against Odian. The way he's going to do this is he's actually brokering a deal with Lord Bactra, which is his older brother, another Sith Lord, who Bactra actually wants to take up a presence on a planet which exists within Daemon-controlled space. So Bactra says, I only need to be there for a little bit. I want to strike this planet because it's got a lot of minerals that are going to help me make superconductors. So if you let me be there, it's only going to be for like 6 weeks. And Daemon's like, okay, well that's fine. But if we're going to do that, then I want your Arxium. And Arxium is a mobile university that people will use for training military type personnel. Jaro is debriefed on this mission. Daemon actually is, when he's brokering the deal with Bactra, plans on Odian being tipped off to this, and then he wants to entrap Odian so he can strike against him. And in order to broker this deal, they're going to meet on Gazari. That's another planet you hear about right afterwards. Now back to Narsk. The story kind of jumps back and forth between points of views. So Narsk is captured by the Correctors. He's then interrogated by Daemon later. Daemon is wondering if he's a spy or if he's there to try to steal secrets from him, which he is, but he doesn't know that quite yet. Daemon Damon likes to dive into people's minds to try to learn information about why they're there and learn who they are, and rather than asking questions. He can actually, I guess you would say, it's not really a force persuade, but it's more like a mind invade power that he displays. Don't think I've really seen that in the movies or anything like that, or in TV shows. He does employ this tactic. So later on, after Narsk is captured, and Narsk is being bound to this large wheel, like a torture device, I suppose, Kerra finds him and releases him later, cuts him off of this wheel. He goes rolling out of a window somewhere. Damon realizes that he escapes. Doesn't really do anything about it to try to get him back, but eventually somehow Narsk ends up on Odian's flagship, which is who he works for anyway. I tried to read through it to find out how he ends up on the flagship. I don't think it even really mentions how he gets there, but he's there. So Kerra is planning on stowing on Damon's ship because she learns of his plan to try to strike against Odian. So she figures if she can hide on his ship while he's trying to complete this mission, she's going to try to assassinate Damon to try to take him down. So they go to Gazari. Bactra shows up with the Arxium. He lowers it onto the planet, and Damon also brought along his recruits from Industrial Heuristics that are going to then travel onto the Arxium to basically live there and train. While they're trying to make their way over to the Arxium, Odian then shows up. Bactra kind of runs into him on the way out of the deal, and Bactra looks at Odian and says, well, the deal's over, so whatever happens now, I don't really care. So do whatever you're going to do. So Odian says, okay. So he jumps in, he's going to take the bait while the recruits are entering onto the Arxium. When he then attacks, Damon is ready for it, and he has Jar Rusher's crew ready, the military mercenaries, to attack Odian at that point. Odian, however, has some really crazy military machines. He's got these big drills that basically fly down to the planet, and they kind of dig themselves in and they lodge themselves in, and they start shooting at everything around them. It's kind of crazy when you read it. Kerra realizes that he's attacking while the recruits are trying to get onto the Arxium, and one of the recruits is Tan Tango, the granddaughter of one of her friends. So she feels like she needs to save those recruits. So she gets onto the planet. She's running through the crossfire, eventually is able to save the recruits from any harm. And she also runs into Jar Rusher in the meantime. Well, she realizes that he's got this big ship, and she says, hey, we have to get on the ship. We have to take off out of here so I can try and help these people. Jar was like, no, we're not going to do that. I'm a mercenary. I have a job here. I work for Damon. I have to stay here and try to help fight Odian's forces. And she goes, screw that. We need to get out of here. So then she just loads everybody on. Jar was like, well, I guess I've lost control of the situation. They leave, and in the middle of the fight, I kind of glossed over this, Damon actually joins with Odian in a way because Bactra doesn't expect to be targeted at this point, but they both target Bactra to take him out so that way they can try to divvy up his territory. You learn later on why they're trying to take over territory, but this happens. Can't remember if Bactra actually dies. I think they mentioned later that he's dead. So the plan just like changed up in the middle of it. It's kind of weird. Kerra and Jar are on the ship with all of these recruits from Industrial Heuristics, all these kids basically. And now they're traveling away from Gazari, and they're like, well, we have to find a safe place to take these kids to where they can live productive, safe lives. There's no hyperspace lanes that can just take them straight to the Republic because they're all owned by different Sith Lords. So they're going to get blocked wherever they go. So Jaro actually learns of a planet called Bylura that's ran by 2 children. So he figures, well, it's ran by children. We're taking children there. It should be safe for children, right? Kara's like, ran by children? That's weird, but whatever. We'll check it out. So they go to the planet. Kerra gets off to scope out the place, looking at everybody traveling around. She quickly learns that something's off because people are just like in a rush to get places. They're not noticing anything passing by, especially her just running by. She's new to the place. You'd think they would stop to like look at her or something, but no one stops. She tries to interrogate one of them, but they're just like so disturbed that they just keep on walking. So she eventually finds out that there's these large brain-like organisms that speak telepathically to these people, and she has to find out, well, who's giving them orders. So then she finds out later that there's a Sith Lord in this building that is also helping out these 2 other Sith Lords, which are the children that own the planet or run the planet. They're later referred to as the Diarchy. The Sith Lord she runs into, his name is Saj Kalishan, kind of like a middle-of-the-road Sith Lord, I guess. When they call people Sith Lords in this book, it's just a term thrown around. Used to think that Sith Lords were super powerful people. Well, some of them are kind of powerful and some of them are like that powerful. They just call them Sith Lords anyway, because it's just I think it's by heritage they could become Sith Lords. So she meets up with Saj Kalishan. They actually get into a fight because then he realizes that she's a Jedi Knight. He has to fight her. So they fight, but then he also tells her about the children that run the planet, and he like leads her up to the room where they are, kind of knowing that maybe she might die by their hand in some way. I don't know. But she shows up there, she meets the children, and then she tries to ask questions like, well, what are they doing? What's their plan? Like, how do they oppress all these people? Well, Saj also later refers to himself as the regent, so he's kind of like enabling them to oppress these people. The two Sith Lord children are named Quillian and Dromika. Quillian is like a handicapped boy. He almost kind of looks like a paraplegic, I guess, and I think he's also maybe a bit mentally challenged, but he can only speak through the Force, like telepathically, and he can only speak to his sister through the Force. So he can't speak to anyone else physically. He only speaks to her through the Force. Dromika can talk physically to other people and hear his instructions, but when she talks to people, she can only speak in Force persuasion. So everything that she says to people, she's overwhelming them with the Force to do her bidding, whatever that bidding might be. I don't know whether it's asking questions, but she only speaks in Force persuade, which is weird and crazy. Haven't heard of it before in any other books I've read. So at one point, Dromika actually orders Kerra to kneel, and she says it so strongly and firmly that Kerra is forced literally to kneel. And she eventually fights her way out of this situation. She is able to get her lightsaber and she starts fighting Saj Kalishan again. Jaro finds out what's going on and actually attacks the building they're in and blows a big hole in it. Kerra is realizing that this diarchy like works together. So when that hole gets blown in it, she sees that Dromika is like distracted and almost like kind of wilts down, because I guess she learns that Quillian is actually feeding instructions to her, where she then feeds the instructions to the big brain-like things I talked about before, that then talk to people telepathically and order them to do things. So like it's this entire like force-led oppressive system that makes people work constantly. It's just kind of weird. So anyway, when Kerra realizes that Dromika like kind of wilts down like from the distraction of this building being blown up a little bit, she decides to grab Quillian and take him onto their ship and separate the two. She knows that Quillian is kind of handicapped, can't really talk to anybody, doesn't really have any force powers beyond talking to Dromika telepathically. They take him, kind of abduct him off the planet. As they're trying to escape the system, a bunch of white ships show up, and they're actually being attacked by the military forces on Bylura. So these kids have a military force. And the white ships start to shoot at these ships that are attacking Jaro and Kerra on his ship. His ship is called the Diligence, by the way. I forgot to mention that before. The ships from Bylura are starting to shoot the Diligence, and the white ships are shooting the military force coming from Bylura. The military ships on Bylura back off. The white ships reach out to Diligence and actually reveal themselves. It's a Sith Lord named Arcadia, and she says, I'm here to help. So she leads them to her system called the Arcadianate. You got the Daemonate, you got the Odeonate, now you got the Arcadianate. It's kind of what they call their own systems that they rule. So they get there. Arcadia brings them down to the planet level. She tries to charm them over, kind of. You feel like she's like a nice Sith Lord. She gives them a tour. She shows them all the people that work there. She has this weird system where people work different jobs, but then they get promoted randomly at certain times to work another job. Maybe not necessarily promoted, but they just get switched over. And whether they're qualified or not, they just keep getting assigned new jobs at different times. Maybe not constantly throughout the day, but maybe every couple weeks they get assigned a new job. She would frame it as she's trying to constantly challenge them to better themselves, but really it's just distracting them from her real operation, which you'll learn about later. So she's giving them a tour, she's showing them around, and eventually she invites Kerra to sit in on this family meeting called the Bequest. She gives her a little backstory first, and she makes her realize that there's a hierarchy that exists in Sith Space, and at the top of the hierarchy is the grandmother, and her name is Villia Calamandra. Arcadia first introduces herself as Arcadia of Calamandra. So you have Villia, and she had 7 sons and daughters who were all Sith Lords. And she puts forth this contest called the Charge Matrica. And the goal of this contest was to have any of the Sith Lords try to expand their holdings as much as possible, basically increase their empire as much as possible. And at the right time, the winner of this contest would then be given her legacy, which is to be the leader of Sith Space. The Sith Lord you learn about, that's Arcadia's father, his name is Lord Chagris. He wins the Charge Matrica. He mysteriously dies quickly after that. Arcadia suggests that Villia was the one who had set up for him to be killed. He dies, and some time passes. about, I think it's like 30 or 40 years later, all of the sons and daughters of Vilya then have grandsons and daughters of Vilya. And after her sons and daughters pass, Vilya then looks at her grandsons and granddaughters and introduces a new charge matrica for them to have this contest to increase their holdings as much as possible. They'll be given her legacy at the right time if they win. So Arcadia doesn't like this because she feels like she's only creating these contests to keep all of the Sith Lords here fighting each other, killing each other, and just occupied while she just rules over the whole space. And she doesn't think she has any intention of actually giving up her power at all. They're about to have this family meeting, and it's going to take place by hologram. And Kerra is supposed to sit in on it. But she's not supposed to say anything, and the family's not supposed to know that she's there. If the family knows that she's there, Arcadia would have to kill her. So they have this meeting. This is where they bring up that Bactra died, and I think that's when Odeon and Daemon killed him back on Gazari. So they're discussing like how to divide up his holdings and his territory. And they talk about some other things within the family meeting. But anyway, they end the meeting. This is where Arcadia reveals that she believes that Vilya was in charge of killing Lord Chagris. And Arcadia suggests that because of this, and because she doesn't agree with the contest that's put forth, that Kerra should go and assassinate Vilya. Well, Kerra hears this and she says, well, I don't work for Sith and I don't work with Sith, so no, I'm not going to do that. Arcadia says, okay, well, I thought you would try and help me out because you want to try and help take down some Sith Lords, but I'm gonna have to kill you then. She doesn't kill her right away. She imprisons her and she puts her in this building. And the building is like a test center. And what they do is they take people and they put them in these bins and they put oxygen masks on them. And they basically subdue them or paralyze them. And every once in a while, they bring someone out that works there to ask them just a bunch of questions. The questions she was asked most of the time was stuff about the Jedi. Because people in Sith Space don't know anything about Jedi and don't know what they do, don't know what they stand for. They don't really know much about them. The only person she realizes that knows anything about Jedi is Narsk, the Bothan. And she's kind of suspicious of that. Like, where does this guy come from? How does he know about Jedi? Because if he spends time here and he works for a bunch of Sith Lords, he wouldn't know anything about the Jedi, but he seems to know a lot. She's imprisoned in this building. Arcadia then goes to Narsk and says, hey, I took care of Kerra because she wasn't going to help me. So because she's not going to help me, you're second in line to help me. I need you to go kill Vilya. So Narsk goes, okay, sure, I'll do that. What Arcadia doesn't know is that Narsk actually works for Vilya, and you kind of find that out later, and he has no intention of killing her. So what he's going to do then is he's going to try and go free Kerra to get out, which they then, after she gets freed, she realizes what that test center was all about, and then she escapes. Jaro realizes something's going wrong. There's a bunch of fighting that happens. Arcadia fights some people. Jaro is fighting a bunch of the people on the planet. Kerra is trying to escape. Narsk, after he frees Kerra, realizes that he now has to go on the ship that he was asked to stow away on to go kill Vilya, and he decides to take Quillian with him because he doesn't feel like that Quillian's in the right hands with Arcadia, so he wants to take him to Vilya because he feels like he'll be protected under Vilya since he's kind of handicapped. So Kerra runs into Narsk again at some point throughout all this fighting, and then Narsk somehow, I can't remember how, is able to get a hold of coordinates for a hyperspace lane to get back to the Republic. So Kerra's like, great! So then Narsk gives her these coordinates, she writes them on her arm, and she has to now get back to Jaro so then she can tell Jaro about these coordinates and get the heck out of there so they can take the children recruits and bring them to Republic and they can be safe and live happy lives. So eventually Kerra escapes, gets back to the Republic. Narsk escapes with Quillian, gets back to Vilya. He explains everything that happened to Vilya, and Vilya basically just doesn't really think anything of it. She basically just talks to Narsk and says, well, I have this contest for a reason. I'm going to continue to let them play it out. That's basically all she says. Kerra gets back to the Republic and is super happy that she was able to save all these people, and she later recounts that she saved over 40,000 people at this point, which is pretty cool. So that's kind of her whole deal. She spends time in Sith Space to try to save people from being oppressed and brings them back to the Republic. So that's just a quick overview of the book. I really did enjoy the book. It wasn't my favorite book. There were times where it's kind of a hard read, and it's only because John Jackson Miller has this habit of introducing things and people and situations. He doesn't actually really introduce them. He just starts talking about people and ships and the situation. He doesn't really explain what's going on until you kind of learn it later. He might introduce a few people that are talking to each other about a plan, and you don't really know how they connect to each other until later, where you just kind of like get little tidbits of the story, and then eventually stuff starts to piece together, and then you know what's going on. In that way, way, it's kind of hard to follow. I was still able, in spite of that, to be able to place myself in the story and visualize everything pretty well. So I still enjoyed the book. It was still fun to read. Just not as much of a page turner as maybe like a Drew Karpyshyn book, which I mentioned before. Love that author, great author. But I kind of felt the same way when I was reading John Jackson Miller's Lost Tribe of the Sith series. I reviewed that book way back, but that was back before I was giving any spoilers for the books. So if you want to check out that video, you could always check that as well. So the characters in the book. There's only one Jedi that's central to the story, and that's Kerra Holt. You learn about Vanner Treese, which is her former master, but he's just talked about sparingly. Doesn't really have any place in the story. I don't know who the Jedi Grand Master is at this point. I can't remember if they mentioned it in the book, but I don't believe that person is mentioned at all. Kerra holds her own against most of the opponents in the book. She's mostly good at escaping situations. She doesn't overpower anybody. She's skilled enough to get past a fight and then get out of there. You never really hear of her really taking down anybody easily or even showing off any unique skills or anything like that. But she does put up her own fight. She's a pretty good fighter. I would probably compare her to like an episode 6 Luke Skywalker. And if some people kind of like look at that and say, well, come on, episode 6 Luke Skywalker killed Darth Vader. I mean, yeah, he did, but Darth Vader was older, gone through a bunch of torment through the suit that he was wearing. I felt like that was a pretty fair comparison. He's not super skilled in the movie. He is still coming into his own. He is not even close to building the new Jedi Temple yet. So based on the kind of fighting that he did in that movie, I felt like that was a pretty good comparison to Kerra Holt. There's several Sith in the story because they takes place in Sith Space, so there's going to be a bunch of Sith, and I believe all the Sith Lords in the book are related because you find that out when Kerra sits in on the bequest. Daemon is the first Sith Lord that you learn about. He's a very self-obsessed young Sith Lord that believes he's like the almighty creator of everything. And he actually has this goal where he wants to try to control people through the Force. He wants to like live through them. And it's kind of the same power that Dromica and Quillian have, because Dromica can force persuade almost anybody, and Quillian is kind of directing her, which allows them to just exert their will on everything around them. And that's what Daemon wants to do. But he's having trouble doing it because he's tried to do it a couple of times with people that work for him, but he's unsuccessful. Kerra actually gets to witness some of it at one point, and she's like, wow, this is really weird. Because Daemon tries to do it and he fails miserably. Odian is Daemon's brother. Can't remember if he's older or younger brother. I think he's an older brother because Daemon, I feel like, is the youngest. And he's just a warmongering Sith Lord. You don't really learn a ton about him, just that he blows up stuff first and asks questions later. The kind of guy he is. Bactra is the older brother to those two. He's more calculating. He only makes the appearance in the bequest and also during the fight on Gazari. Arcadia is the other Sith Lord you learn about, where she helps him escape by Laura and then takes him to the Arcadia Night, and she also teaches Kerra about the bequest and the charge matrica and stuff like that. Arcadia seems like a pretty skilled Sith Lord. Couldn't really think of anybody to compare her to, but in terms of everybody else's empire that they've built, like Daemon and Odian, it seems like she has the most successful operation going on, especially because the people that work there don't feel like they're oppressed. And it's probably the most important thing you want if you lead an oppressed society. You don't want them to feel oppressed. You just want them to be oppressed so you can accomplish whatever you need to. I assume that's what she would want. I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying that's what a Sith Lord would want. Villia is the Sith overlord, if you will, of the story. She leads over the entirety of Sith Space, and she is the grandmother to basically all the Sith Lords that later are participating in the new Charge Matrica. You don't really get a sense of how powerful she is. You'd assume she's at least somewhat powerful, but you'd have to assume also that all the Sith Lords are her grandchildren. Most of them aren't going to think about killing her, except for Arcadia, and Arcadia couldn't even find the right mercenary to do it. So because of that, it was hard to find a good person to compare her to. You might say Palpatine because she's an overlord, she rules over the whole thing, but Palpatine also took over the Republic and killed it, so she hasn't done that yet, so definitely not that powerful. I don't really have a good comparison for her. The other miscellaneous character that you would learn about and he's central to the story is Jaro Rusher. He's a military mercenary, worked for Daemon at first, but then got tricked into taking all these recruits around space to try to find a suitable place for them to land. Funny, witty, sarcastic, all the things you like in that kind of a character. I liked reading his dialogue a lot. Can the story be canon? It could. It probably won't be. It's really obscure. It's not that significant. It's mostly just it's a story about Kerra Holt. It's about her adventures and what she tries to do to save people. So it's not really something that's altering in Star Wars history. If they had like a miniseries about it, I think that would be pretty cool. But like a TV miniseries. But all in all, it's not something I would think that would be pushed to be canon. But it's a pretty decent story overall. Is it a good book? I think it's a decent book. I'm gonna give it like a 7.3, only because, like I said, John Jackson Miller's writing style, not my favorite. I still enjoyed the plot, I enjoyed the characters, and I enjoyed the story overall. Just readability was just a little bit lower tier for me. Although, given all that, I do encourage you guys to go out and read it. If you wanted to purchase the book, there will be a link in the description to do that. It will be an Amazon link, and any Amazon link you click and purchase items from, I will benefit from that, and this channel will benefit from that. But it'll also help you keep this channel going and help keep the content flowing. With that being said, I really appreciate you guys stopping by to watch the video. May the Force be with you, and I'll see you on the next video.